The four-horse carriage rushes swiftly down the forest road. Inside, the blonde woman holds back tears, whispering, "Shit." Her thoughts are filled with bitterness. That bastard. Crown Prince Caesar, the protector of the empire, solemnly enters. The courtiers whisper in admiration of his beauty and strength. Caesar searches for his consort, asking Ren about her arrival. The herald announces, "Her Highness the Crown Princess enters." The prince's gaze flashes with impatient anticipation. He recalls the 2 years of war endured for one purpose. Irina Ren, it was all just for her. Giovanetta smilingly congratulates him on his triumph. The prince coldly interrupts, "Where is my true consort?" Giovanette coquettishly insists, "I am your consort, your highness." Caesar immediately draws his sword, and her smile is replaced by horror. His gaze blazes, fangs showing. "Where is the Irina?" he roars. Irina's crying face in the dark carriage comes to mind. Irina is the duke's illegitimate daughter, lame and despised. Caesar is the cursed prince of the empire, the noblest and lowest. The curse of the Dragon of Light has made a monster out of the shining prince. The lame bastard and the cursed prince are the perfect pair of fate's rejects. And yet Irina remembers being happy. She was so happy with him that she wanted nothing more. But the decree has come. Prince Caesar is to lead the troops in war. Irina asks him in horror, "Are you going?" She doesn't understand. Why? You know you might not come back, don't you? Irina pleads, clinging to him. "Caesar, you will die. Please don't go." He promises her with tears in his eyes, "I will come back. I promise." Irina cries out in despair as he leaves. Caesar remembers how she clung to him as if he were her only salvation. But now he thinks, "When your curse broke and you were healed, you left me." Caesar bitterly. 2 years of unanswered letters while the palace whispered about you and my sister. Giovanetta gloats. "Prince Caesar loves me and you don't belong there." Irina despairs. "Has healing made you ashamed of me?" Tears flow down her cheeks. "If I had known how things would turn out." She whispers, gasping in pain, "I would have done better." Their happiness shatters like glass, would have stayed the same, broken. A sudden rumble, the carriage cracks under the impact. Irina is tossed around the cabin from the powerful shock. The coachman looks around in panic. "What happened? We're under attack!" Irina's eyes full of terror, the coachman shouts, "Stay here, I'll get out!" Blood splatters on Irina's face, her eyes filled with horror at what is happening. The coachman fights off the masked assailant. Irina wonders, are they robbers or... Giovanette's ominous silhouette appears in Irina's thoughts. Or am I their target? Irina gasps in fear, "No, I can't die like this." Irina's gaze becomes determined. I must survive. The survivor is the strong one. She jumps out of the wrecked carriage, fleeing for her life. The attackers notice her escape. Shit! She's getting away. Catch her. Irina rushes through the forest, haunted by the thought, does surviving mean winning? Panic won't let her go as she desperately tries to escape. Suddenly, someone's dark hand grabs her hair. But what can I do in such a hopeless situation? Suddenly, a horse stops nearby, kicking up dust. Her pursuer falls, struck down by an unknown savior. Irina lies on the ground, hair disheveled, eyes full of terror. She turns around, unable to believe her eyes. Huh? A heavy boot in dark armor treads the ground in front of her. A huge figure looms over her, casting a shadow. Irina instinctively snatches the dagger hidden on her leg. With desperation in her voice, she shouts, "Don't come any closer!" Lightning flashes in the sky, heralding a storm or salvation. In the rain, Irina looks up, wondering, who is that? Who could it be? Out of the darkness and rain looms the silhouette of a knight in shining armor. The savior's black hair is wet from the rain, hiding his face. Tears flow down Irina's cheeks. She can't believe her eyes, whispering, It's Caesar, his piercing gaze fixed on her, rain dripping down his face. Irina asks in desperation, Why have you come?" His steel armor gleams in the rain. His figure seems indestructible. A bitter realization flashes in Irina's eyes. Ah, now I understand. A trail of blood against the white background, and her thought, "You have come to see my end." She thinks bitterly. For now, for the perfect Caesar, I am the only flaw. Outside the window, the rain is pouring down. The sign reads, 3 years ago. They say brides cry a lot on rainy days, wondering how long today's bride will live. And no wonder, because her fiancé is that monstrous prince. Irina remembers the past, holding a brush in her hand. I've always wondered. Giovanette's evil smirk. Now that that's out of the way, Why did they bring me here in the first place? Irina thinks, mopping the floor under their gazes. She recalls how she, the illegitimate daughter of Duke Flores, was forcibly taken away from her mother. Annarisa, her mother, later died of the plague in the streets. In Duke Flores' house, her position was always at rock bottom. Worse than the servants, she was humiliated, slung mud. Her position was even lower than the horses and hunting dogs on the estate. She was at rock bottom. But one day everything changed. The Duke announced, "You have been chosen as a candidate for wife to Caesar's first prince." The Duchess coldly added, "The Flores family traditionally supplies empresses." Irina bitterly realized, now it's your turn, and only then did she understand. She, a thorn in their side, had been brought to this mansion for this marriage. The eldest daughter, Giovanetta, wasn't even engaged, but the proposal had gone to Irina, an illegitimate child. All because her fiancé was a cursed prince, the first Prince Caesar. Prince Caesar had been weak since childhood, rarely appearing in public, the son of a late empress who had gone mad. The nickname Monstrous Prince was firmly entrenched behind the first prince. No nobleman was willing to give his daughter to a cursed man, hastily marrying them off or adopting strangers. The imperial family had tried 4 times to arrange his arranged marriage. However, none of these attempts were successful. The weddings never took place. For every young lady betrothed to him, died. Irina stands before the Duke and Duchess, realizing, "So this is why I was brought here." She asks in horror, "Are you telling me that I'm to be the prince's bride?" The Duchess gloatingly confirms, "Yes, you, born on the streets, will be his bride. Isn't that cause for gratitude?" The cause of death of previous brides was not officially revealed, but everyone whispered about the prince's curse. A marriage of convenience to that same cursed prince was what awaited her, and Irina's hand clenched in terror. Irina realizes that this proposal is effectively a death sentence. The Duchess coldly states, "You will become the most noble woman of the empire, a great honor." These words, like snake venom, penetrate Irina's mind. She looks at the Duchess and Giovanette standing over her like judges. They tempt her with the poisoned cup, but there is no choice. There is nothing left for Irina but to accept this bitter fate. If this is her fate, she will meet it face to face. The Duchess smirks upon hearing Irina's sudden agreement. With a tortured smile, Irina announces, "I will marry the first prince." A brief change of status. How could she refuse such a noble position? Irina stands resolutely before the Duchess and Giovanetta, realizing her choice. A bloody fingerprint seals her consent on the marriage contract. With a tortured smile, she confirms, "I will be the prince's consort. It is my choice." She is willing to follow this path, even if it leads to doom. All alone, in simple attire, Irina awaits her fate by the fireplace. On her wedding day, clad in her wedding gown, she nervously thinks of her groom. The prince has not shown up and is replaced at the ceremony by a representative under a black veil. A drop of sweat drips down her face, betraying her hidden tension. Her hand clutches the fabric of her dress, a fresh scratch visible on her skin. And no one had even done a basic security check before the wedding. A sudden noise causes Irina to flinch as she sits on the bed in her chambers. She turns around sharply, sensing someone's presence. He's here. That man. Irina's eyes widen with horror, sensing something wrong. A knight in shining armor enters the room, his intentions unclear. Behind him, the ominous clanking of heavy chains can be heard. Irina looks anxiously at what is happening, whispering, "This is..." A cage on wheels guarded by 2 guards appears before her, and she cannot believe her eyes. Inside the cage is a young man with dark hair and a collar, introduced as Prince Caesar. The knight informs her that the prince is anesthetized and unconscious. Irina stares at the empty shackles in shock, unable to believe that this is her fiancé. The knights unceremoniously toss the prince onto the bed like a thing. The Irina watches in bewilderment as the knight announces, "Then I shall bow out." She shouts in panic, "Wait, hey!" trying to stop them. As they leave, the knight tosses over his shoulder, "The drug will wear off soon, he'll wake up." Irina is left alone in a huge room with an emotionless prince on the marriage bed. She thinks in despair, "What am I to do? None of my marriage instruction prepared me for this." Irina looks at the prince's feet, visible from under the canopy, and ponders whether he is cursed or not. Her thought continues, "He's a prince of the empire, first in line to the throne, and he's being treated like a beast." Tears come to Irina's eyes as she realizes the cruelty of the situation. She concludes, At first glance, he's no different from an ordinary human. Irina stands over the motionless prince, the shadow of the unknown looming over them. She covers her mouth with her hand in horror, unable to believe her eyes. What is this? Whispers Irina, gripped by a chilling fear. Outside the window, darkness thickens, foreshadowing an unsettling night. Suddenly, the prince's hand lying on the bed begins to change. Instead of a human palm, a black, scaly paw with sharp claws appears. The prince twitches slightly, his face distorted by a grimace of awakening. His eye opens abruptly, glowing red, and fangs are seen coming out of his mouth. The prince jerkily sits up on the bed, his awakening looking frightening. He groans, grabbing his head, clearly suffering from the effects of anesthesia or a curse. The prince sits on the bed, clutching his head, clearly suffering. With a wild scream, he sweeps away the candlesticks, which fly to the floor with a clatter. The prince's bare foot touches the cold floor, and he breathes heavily as he rises. Irina recoils and falls to the floor, shocked by his awakening. Clamping her hand over her mouth, she stares in horror at the approaching prince. A tear rolls down her cheek as she watches him silently. An unknown force topples the furniture. Irina doesn't realize what that power is. The noise subsides, and Irina timidly peeks out, wondering if the drug is still working. Her eyes widen at the realization. The drug no longer holds it back. The prince looms over Irina, his shadow engulfing her and his red eye glowing ominously. The prince's red eye glows ominously in the semi-darkness, his gaze boding no good. Irina froze with horror, drops of sweat dripping down her pale face. Her mind flashes back to the cruel words, "You're going to die anyway, so what's the point of this wedding?" Memories take her back to the past, where court ladies whispered about her bitter fate as an abandoned bastard. A dagger, the fifth gift for the prince's brides, appears before her mind's eye. Giovanetta looks down at the young Irina as she holds out this wedding gift to her. With a venomous sneer, she pronounces, "Someone like you is just an appetizer for him, so here you go." The evil stepsister leans toward Irina, her words pure venom. "If I were you, I'd kill myself rather than be defiled by a monster," Giovanetta hisses in her ear. A tear rolls down Irina's cheek in the present. She remembers those words and her doom all too well. Irina realizes herself an abandoned pawn on the chessboard of fate. She ponders. The only difference is whether she will die by her own hand or by the hand of the monster before her. Giovanette's words come to mind again. "If I were you, I would kill myself." But Irina looks at the blade and thinks, "Giovanetta, there's something you don't know." Memories of past humiliation strengthen her will. She has never given up and has always fought for life. Clutching the dagger, she decides, this weapon will never be aimed at herself. A harsh truth resounds in her thoughts. In the end, it is survival of the fittest. Irina thrusts the dagger forward in terror, shouting to the prince, "Stay away!" Tears stream down her face as she looks at him with despair. The prince seems surprised by her words, repeating, "Stay away?" Irina cries out desperately, "Yes, stay away," displaying her dagger. The prince instantly shortens the distance, his face close to hers. His red eyes stare calmly at the point of the dagger at her throat. "Well, what are you doing?" Irina babbles, unable to believe he isn't afraid of the blade. They freeze in front of each other, Irina aiming the dagger and the prince looking at her. Suddenly, the prince wrinkles in pain, his fangs bared, he lets out a suppressed groan. The prince screams wildly, grabbing his monstrous arm over his head. The Irina is stunned. It does not understand the cause of his sudden suffering. He collapses to the floor, continuing to scream and squirm in agony. Irina shivers as she watches him and is struck by the thought, is he afraid? Irina is perplexed, trying to figure out what exactly he is afraid of. Thunder rumbles outside the window, illuminating the stained glass window. A hunch hits her. Is he afraid of thunderstorms? The prince shrinks to the floor, covering his head with his hands in fear. A tear rolls from his red eye. He looks like a frightened child. Irina stares at him in amazement. It seems so strange. Does the rumored monster shake so much from mere thunder? The prince lifts his head, his gaze meets hers, and she notices something important. Irina gently reaches up to his face. He freezes. As she gazes into his eyes, she realizes, this man is not a monster. Irina looks at the prince sympathetically, whispering, "It's okay, he's just a scared animal." The prince looks up at her and she says softly, "That sound is loud, but it won't hurt us, okay?" She continues to reassure him, Yes, it's fine. Nothing bad is going to happen, noticing that he reacts. Irina gently touches his monstrous hand, trying to quiet his trembling. Suddenly, the prince screams in pain again, grabbing his head, and Irina recoils. His hand clenches in agony against the blood-red flashes, foreshadowing something terrible. Wait, calm down! Irina shouts in panic, seeing his agony. Hearing him growl, Irina freezes in fear, her dagger lying nearby on the floor. She slowly reaches for the dagger, thinking, just a little more, just a little more. Someone's hand in a black lace glove intercepts her palm, preventing her from grabbing the weapon. Irina drops to the floor, the prince looming over her, his face frighteningly close. Her hand freezes a centimeter away from the dagger, stopped by another man's lace-clad palm. Suddenly, the scene changes. The old lady introduces herself as Mercedes, His Highness's assistant. Close up. The prince's sharp fangs are bared, foreshadowing danger. His face contorts with rage, his red eyes burn, and scales appear on his neck. Irina watches in horror as his appearance changes right before her eyes. She feels a primal fear of this creature consuming her. The prince stares at his bleeding hand as if he is being devoured by something from within. He leans over to Irina, her eyes widening with shock and foreboding. The prince begins to lick the blood from the wound with his monstrous hand. The prince licks the blood away. Irina whispers in shock, "Ah!" She gets hot and asks him to stop, his face dangerously close. Close up, Irina is stunned, a tear rolling down her cheek. Your appearance, remarks Irina, seeing the prince looking at his hand. Irina's thought he's back to normal. Irina is surprised. He's calm again. Why? It dawns on her. Could it be after drinking blood? The prince looks peaceful, almost smiling, blood on his lips. Irina looks at him thinking, that looks less like a monster. Her thought continues, and more like a huge beast. Irina sits on the floor and the peaceful prince sleeps, resting his head in her lap. She touches his chin, thinking, how can he sleep so soundly after all this? Irina ponders. He was acting strange, but it's not like he wanted to hurt me. An image pops into her mind, her shackled, being led in a cage under escort. Looking at the sleeping prince, she wonders, could he be as trapped as I am? The prince mumbles something in his sleep, a slight smile appearing on his lips. Irina thinks with a sly grin, yes, the important thing now is... She looks up at him, realizing that I'm somehow miraculously still alive. Sunlight breaks through the huge stained glass window, illuminating the room. The door is ajar and someone peeks in, muttering, "Do I really have to clean a corpse again?" The guards at the door whisper, expecting to see another massacre. One of them is perplexed. Hey, what's this all of a sudden? His eyes round in surprise as he looks inside. Irina is sitting on the floor, the prince asleep in her lap, and she puts a finger to her lips, asking for silence. The guard who enters freezes on the threshold, dumbfounded by what he sees. Suddenly, the prince's red eye pops open. He is awake. The prince sits up abruptly, growling and looking around. Irina looks at him fearfully. He immediately covers Irina with himself, shouting furiously to the guard, "No, don't you dare!" The prince is breathing heavily, his fangs bared. He is clearly at his limit. Irina stares at him, confusedly repeating, "Don't you dare?" Irina exhales in relief, gently rebuking the prince. "Yeah, you shouldn't have done that." She mentally promises him, sitting behind her, "I'll make sure no one else hurts you." The prince looks at her confused when Irina asks, "You'll behave now, won't you?" The guards look over in shock, not believing their eyes. What is this? This can't be..." One of them, stammering, tries to intervene. "Please stop immediately!" A senior guard orders to inform the emperor, seeing the prince protecting the arena. Mercedes' hand in a lace glove freezes over the red flowers upon hearing the news. Mercedes reports to the red-haired lady. The first prince and his bride had a safe wedding night. The bride is only slightly scratched. The red-haired lady asks in surprise, "Did she survive?" looking at the bloodied maid. "How amusing," the lady utters, her dark dress rustling. The red-haired lady in luxurious surroundings finds the situation quite entertaining. Empress Cornelia appears before us, her gaze full of guile. Mercedes stands humbly before the empress, who gives orders. The past comes to light. Cornelia was the emperor's mistress before she became empress. Her son, the second Prince Matthias, was also born out of wedlock and has been waiting a long time to be recognized. Mercedes reflects that the empress does not tolerate mention of illegitimate children, which Irina is. Cornelia decides Irina's fate with a chuckle. Now that they are married, she will need a residence. The Empress points to Mercedes. Allocate the Jade Palace of Peridot to her. The name Peridot Jade Palace hangs ominously in the air. Mercedes replies with barely perceptible trepidation, "Yes, as you command, your majesty." The Empress, picking at a pomegranate, clarifies the girl's name. "Irina, then." She forcefully stabs the fruit with her fork. "Ah, that's right. There were so many of them, it's hard to remember." Cornelia ponders how long Irina will last, or if that one will take her place. A sly, anticipatory smile plays on her lips. The Empress orders Mercedes, "Tell her to come to my house for tea." A priest in the temple exclaims enthusiastically, "Oh my God, it's a miracle!" He continues looking at Irina. As expected, the descendants of Flores are indeed different. Irina thinks ironically, "Looks like everyone was waiting for me to die. To be honest, I thought so myself." Her gaze falls on a maid carrying a basket of bloody linens, and she freezes. The horror of yesterday comes to mind, a prince in animal form licking up blood. Irina thinks, "The mark remains now the marriage is undeniable, at least." She continues the thought, "For now I can be at peace." Irina is led to a new location, her gaze full of wariness. A gloomy building stands before her, the Jade Palace, her new residence. Mercedes explains that everything happened suddenly, watching Irina's reaction. The Empress's maid asks challengingly if Irina finds the residence unsuitable. Irina looks around silently, her true thoughts hidden. Suddenly, a sly smile appears on her face. "No, I like it." She asks to convey her thanks to the Empress for her care. Mercedes, slightly taken aback, wishes her a good rest. Mercedes walks away, leaving Irina with the title consort of the prince. Irina, exhausted, falls onto the bed in her new room. She breathes heavily, exhausted by the events of the past few days. Mercedes' question pops into her mind. "You don't like the residence?" Irina ponders. "Even in the imperial palace, not much has changed." She chuckles bitterly, but compared to the Flores house, it's nothing. A maid enters the room. "Prince consort, I'll help you with the bath." The maid carries a bucket, ready to perform her duties. Irina turns around, her gaze pensive. "Ah!" She resolutely refuses. "No, I'll do it myself. I don't need help bathing from this day forward." The maid obediently withdraws, accepting the prince consort's words. Irina thinks back to her past, where she can see traces of blood on her neck. She sits barefoot, immersed in thoughts of the humiliations she has endured. In the spacious dining room, Irina is served a breakfast worthy of her new status. She asks the maid where the prince is, and she replies that he will be here soon. The maid explains that she and Prince Caesar will be staying together in the Jade Palace. Irina ponders, "Even if he's cursed, he's still of imperial blood. As long as Caesar is with me, he will be my support." As she waits at the table, she hears that His Highness has already begun his meal. Irina turns around with an anticipatory smile, ready to greet the prince. Suddenly, her smile is replaced with horror at the sight of the prince in chains. The prince has a gruesome muzzle on his face, exposing his fangs, and his neck is wrapped in chains. The guards hold the chained Caesar down, and he tries with all his might to break free. The Irina screams in horror that this is not allowed, but the knight drives her away, fearing that the prince will bite. The prince can barely contain his roar, his eyes full of rage and pain. His scaly hands clutch desperately at the chains, trying to break them. The knight roughly pins Caesar to the floor, ordering him to hold on tighter. The prince lashes out in rage, surrounded by guards armed with spiked spears. Caesar's eyes are bloodshot, and he snarls as he tries to tear off the hated muzzle. Irina screams in desperation for them to stop, but the knight holds her firmly. The prince wriggles, trying to bite the hand pinning his head to the floor. The prince lets out a suppressed groan, the chains digging into his neck and chest. Thick chains tightly constrict his body. He wriggles in impotent rage. The knight stretched the prince out on the floor, holding him down with chains on all sides. The guards pull the chains with force, ordering him to be immobilized more quickly. Irina watches in horror as the knight presses the prince's head to the floor. Her face is contorted with despair. How can they do this? How is this possible? The knight coldly warns Irina not to touch the muzzle or chains if she cares about her fingers. He holds out to her something hidden in his armored glove. Irina looks at the proffered object with bewilderment and fear. The knight walks away, leaving Irina alone with the bound prince in the middle of the dining room. Irina whispers in horror, "My God!" In front of her is Caesar, chained and muzzled, his gaze full of misery. Irina can't believe her eyes, her hand clutched to her chest. The prince looks exhausted, unable to understand what is happening. She looks at the grizzled prince, perplexed as to how anyone could eat like that. On the tray in front of her are raw meat and tongs. Irina's eyes widen at the realization of what is happening. The tongs slide a piece of meat through the bars of the prince's muzzle. Irina thinks, do they really think Caesar is worse than a beast? It's so much like... Her mind flashes back to her own past, full of humiliation and pain. Memories of past humiliation overwhelm Irina, blood and tears mingling in her mind. She presses her lips together, her gaze full of determination and compassion for the prince. Irina jumps up when she hears Caesar groan and calls his name in horror. She resolutely declares that she will remove that horrible muzzle from him at once. The knight warns her again, advising her not to touch the chains or the muzzle if she cares for her fingers. Irina drops to her knees in front of the prince, ignoring the knight's threat. She whispers, looking at the restrained Caesar, "No, no. Nothing justifies treating a man like this." Her hand reaches for the metal cage on the prince's face. She calls out to him again, "Caesar!" Irina tries to remove the muzzle. Caesar growls. She struggles to hold his head back. She calms him down by saying, "It's okay, it won't hurt," as she continues her attempts. Irina tries to remove the muzzle, and Caesar looks at her with anguish as he grits his teeth. She smiles encouragingly at him, assuring him, "See? It's all right, isn't it?" Suddenly, Caesar jerks and falls, Irina fearfully calling his name. The prince squirms in pain. Irina panics and asks what's wrong. He screams in unbearable agony, the scales on his neck becoming more visible. With a deafening crack, the chains on Caesar shatter into pieces. Irina is shocked. The prince slowly rises, freed from his shackles, looming over a dazed Irina. Her memory flashes back to the knight's words. "I advise against touching the muzzle or chains." Horror contorted Irina's face as she remembered the follow-up, "It's for your safety." The knight held out the vial to her. "If anything happens, throw this in his highness's face." Irina turns around in horror, remembering the vial in her hand. Caesar groans, covering his face with a scaly hand, his skin changing. The girl trembles, clutching the vial, and fearfully whispers the prince's name. The vial in her hands begins to glow faintly, catching her attention. The hateful muzzle, the symbol of his suffering, comes to mind. Caesar's eye pours red, scales visible through her fingers. Irina tries to soothe the prince, who squirms, clutching his head. She cries out in horror as his agony peaks. Caesar looms over the fallen Irina, his silhouette frightening. A transformed prince with burning eyes and a grin slowly looms over. Irina looks away in confusion, her determination fighting fear. She grits her teeth, pondering, if I do this? The scene of the knights holding Caesar down comes to her mind, and she thinks, how will I be better than them? Irina wrinkles her nose in pain, noticing the blood on her palm. The blood runs down her hand, and she remembers, speaking of which? Her memory comes back to last night, when Caesar was already losing control. But then he came to his senses quickly, almost hurting her. Irina decides to take a chance, realizing it's her only chance. The transformed Caesar looks at her outstretched bloody hand with rage. Irina offers him her blood. You want it? Then I will give it to you. Caesar growls, baring his fangs. Irina tensely stares at him. Blood drips from her wounded finger offered to the prince. He leans toward her sharply, his dark hair hiding his face. Caesar sinks his teeth into her finger, quenching his thirst. Irina watches in surprise and alarm as he drinks her blood. She flinches, her face contorted with mixed feelings. The prince continues to drink, his eyes still burning red, but the rage is subsiding. Caesar drops to his knees, not taking his hand from hers. Irina sits across from him. She realizes, so that's how he calms down with blood? And calls his name quietly. Caesar looks up, his eyes becoming clearer. He ponders the implications. Irina, pulling away embarrassed, whispers, You've had enough already. Her eyes widen with surprise and slight consternation. Caesar leans toward her, their faces dangerously close, Irina calling out to him confusedly. Suddenly, he pulls her into an embrace. Irina stiffens in his arms. The prince rests his face against her neck. Irina anxiously asks what he is doing. She begs him to stop, wondering if he still needs blood. His fangs are dangerously close. Irina looks on in horror at what is happening. Caesar looms over her, nuzzling against her neck. Irina is stunned. He touches her neck with his lips. Irina lets out a suppressed sigh. The girl tries to stop him, her voice trembling as he continues. Irina whispers Caesar's name as he looms over her, pressing closer and closer. The prince ends up on top of her, Arena on the floor, feeling strange and scared. Her face is flushed. She struggles to exhale. Stop it! Stop it! Caesar doesn't stop, and Arena begs him to stop, please. He finally pulls away, his red eyes glaring at her. So, you want me to stop? Arena tearfully confirms, yes, if you feed on me like this. Caesar looks back at her, his gaze intense. If I do, then what? The girl exclaims in despair, I might as well die, shocking him. His face contorts with horror, and he quietly utters, don't die. Arena, coming to his senses a bit, replies, yes, I don't want to die either, that's why. Arena watches in confusion as Caesar's hand touches her cheek. The prince with burning eyes says firmly, don't. The girl ponders if he understands what death is, but sees the main point. She strokes his hair, realizing, at least you don't want me dead. Arena softly addresses the prince sitting on her lap, Caesar. She looks at him resolutely, introducing herself. I am Arena. Her memory flashes back to Aneris calling her Ren, and she says the name. Caesar struggles but recognizes it and tries to utter it. Our Ren! Suddenly, a happy smile lights up his face, and he exclaims joyfully, Ren! Arena freezes, her eyes wide with amazement. Arena smiles softly, her eyes glowing with kindness and a slight blush. Caesar announces, we are now married, Arena repeats stunned. Married? She ponders the grim prognosis. No one believes I will survive this marriage. In her thoughts are the maids cursing her and their squalid jade palace. Arena also recalls the Empress rejecting them both with Caesar. The prince's current condition is unimportant, for he is her only support now. The girl comes to an important conclusion, and so do I. Arena firmly declares to Caesar, I'm on your side too. He interjects in surprise. Side? She confidently confirms, yes, we are on the same side. Caesar repeats her words thoughtfully, trying to realize their meaning. One side. Caesar, sitting on his knees, offers Arena, if you are wronged again, tell me. He recalls the knights who mistreated her and clarifies, the ones who mistreated you. His face contorts with rage, eyes burning red. I hate them, no! Arena notices him enunciate the negative words more clearly, understanding his pain. She holds out her pinky finger, offering, promise. Caesar looks at her gesture with obvious bewilderment. Arena interlocks their little fingers, explaining, that means you must keep your word. The prince looks thoughtfully at their interlocked fingers, repeating, a promise? The girl smiles softly, asking, do you understand? Caesar smiles back happily, confirming, yes, I promise. Arena hesitates. Did he really understand me? Caesar eats the chicken leg with his hands, Arena corrects him. Arena shows him how to use a fork. Caesar tries to eat with a fork, Arena observes. Caesar eats with a fork, Arena grimaces. Arena feeds Caesar with a spoon. Caesar enjoys eating, Arena is pleased. Arena thinks, he looks more like a baby. Someone knocks on the door. Arena and Caesar are surprised by the arrival of a guest. A servant loudly announces, His Highness Prince Caesar. Caesar turns around in surprise. A guest? Arena wonders if Caesar knows him and asks the stranger, and who are you? The woman who enters apologizes for the disturbance. She introduces herself. I am Mercedes Arunzo, Prince Caesar's assistant. Mercedes adds that she was the prince's nanny and rushed here when she learned of their move. Arena realizes Caesar's nanny then was close to the late Empress Adelaide. Mercedes is dismayed to report that His Highness has become very sensitive lately. She reveals the horrible truth. The knights have been using drugs and violence on him more often. Arena is shocked. Arena's face contorts with indignation and disbelief at what she has heard. Mercedes tearfully utters, Yeah, I'm so sorry. She clutches her handkerchief, confessing her powerlessness before Empress Cornelia. Arena listens silently, her face expressing deep sympathy. The girl ponders. Since Mercedes was close to the former Empress, she must be from a noble family. In her mind, the image of Mercedes defending Caesar, and the conclusion. Such calloused hands. She endured everything for him. Nanny suddenly asks, but more importantly, how did you do it? Arena is surprised. I beg your pardon? Mercedes, wiping away her tears, explains, His Highness has never reacted to anyone like that until now. She continues, looking at Arena. How on earth did you manage to calm him down? Arena is confused. A shocking moment pops up in Arena's mind as Caesar bites her hand until it bleeds. The girl thinks, I can't say I calmed him down with blood. Who would believe such a thing? Irina imagines being accused of witchcraft and being called a witch. A sign flashes in her mind that reads, "Witch Trials." She recalls seeing a witch's massacre as a child wandering the streets. Her eyes reflect the flames. A branded witch is worse than a beggar. Shame and torment await her. A horrifying picture. Witches were burned alive as atonement for their sins. Irina realizes that this is the worst punishment. Even a quick death is not allowed. Mercedes notices her condition and asks worriedly, "Your Highness, are you all right?" Irina decides to hide the truth, replying, "No, nothing," for her secret must remain a secret. Suddenly, someone's black-gloved hand grabs her forearm. Caesar looks at her anxiously, saying her name, Ren. Irina is confused, wondering if Caesar sensed her anxiety, and reassures him, "It's all right, Caesar." Mercedes, glowing with surprise, watches the scene from the sidelines. The nanny, covering her mouth with her hand, suggests hopefully, "Has His Highness really become attached to you?" Irina, struggling to squeeze out a smile, confirms, "Yes." Looking at Caesar, the girl is relieved. That's lucky. Outside the window, dusk is thickening, hinting at the end of the day. Irina lies in bed. Mercedes announces, "Time to rest." Nanny earnestly announces, "Tea with Her Majesty Cornelia is coming up. There is much to prepare tomorrow." Irina opens her eyes anxiously in bed. Tea party with the Empress. She anxiously closes her eyes, pondering, "I've already faced so much. Who knows what will happen when I meet her?" Suddenly, someone's hand grabs Irina's ankle. Irina cries out in surprise, "What was that?" Caesar appears at her bedside, looking at her feet. He gingerly takes her foot, causing Irina to look puzzled. Caesar nuzzles against her foot with a slight chuckle, chuckling. Irina, though embarrassed, looks up at him with a confused smile. The girl gently rebukes Caesar, telling him that he should go to his room. Irina is confused. "What am I supposed to do? I can't kick him out." She sighs, realizing there is nothing she can do. Irina lifts the blanket, inviting Caesar to lie down next to her since he's cold. Caesar smiles happily and happily agrees. "Okay." The prince immediately climbs under the blanket with Irina, snuggling up to her. Irina ponders with embarrassment. We're husband and wife after all, so sleeping together isn't weird. They lie in the same bed, covered by the blanket, in the semi-darkness of the bedroom. Something moves under the blanket, breaking the silence. Irina seems to be falling asleep, but suddenly calls out, "Tse!" Her neck and shoulder blush slightly from someone else's close presence. Caesar looks at the laughing Irina, thinking, "How long has it been since I fell asleep feeling someone's warmth?" Irina, smiling, pulls him closer, touching his chest. The girl gently says that if they snuggle like this, it will be warm and he will fall asleep easily. Caesar, snuggled up against Irina, says thoughtfully, Irina, almost falling asleep, whispers his name and thinks, "I'm so tired. At my limit." The girl sinks into sleep, her breathing becoming even. Caesar gently nuzzles her neck, inhaling her scent. The scene changes. Someone off-screen asks, "Did she survive?" A man in uniform reports, "Yes, thought we'd have to carry another corpse out." The red-haired man remarks with a smirk, "Old farts will love this." Before us is the second prince of the empire, Matthias de la Rosa, with a smug smile. Information pops up. The fundamentalists supported Caesar despite his instability. Matthias reflects, "Actually, they just want a puppet emperor." After years of war with demons, 3 allied powers have formed on the continent. The world map shows the Empire of Assetria, the Elven Forest of Hebrilium, and the Dwarven Steel Alliance of Stoican. The Emperor of Assetria needs the unanimous approval of the lords of these alliances, eager for a puppet ruler, to be recognized. Matthias's aide inquires as to what family Caesar's lucky bride is from, and receives the answer, House of Duke Flores. Matthias chuckles. The family of the hero who slew the dragon gave their daughter to this hollow man. The aide whispers in Matthias's ear, beginning, "But she..." It turns out that Irina is illegitimate, which doesn't surprise Matthias, however. Matthias ponders whether Cosimo's descendants are really that special. The prince speculates that Irina's mother must have been furious. The aide wanted to point something out, but changed his mind, saying, never mind, it's not worth looking at." The aide continued, "But more importantly..." Matthias, taking off his shirt, declares that he doesn't like to look at dying women, but he could have come to the wedding if he had known that Irina would survive. He smirks, anticipating meeting her soon. Suddenly, there is a furious scream, demanding an immediate confession. The maid is on her knees, surrounded by pointing fingers, accused of touching His Highness's jewels. The girl swears in tears that it was not her. In desperation, she tries to blame it on someone else, shouting out a name. The other maids turn away. Someone quietly utters, "No." The tension builds. No, the one who touched the jewels. Irina wakes up abruptly in her bed, her eyes wide with horror. Irina regains consciousness, thinking it was a horrible dream, and sees Caesar beside her. A drop of sweat drips down her face as she stares silently in front of her. The girl notices that the sleeping Caesar with his eyes closed looks like a real aristocrat. She is sitting on a huge bed in a luxurious bedroom when she hears some noise. The door creaks open and Irina is perplexed. What's going on? The maids stand outside the door, turning around in surprise at the sound. The eldest maid asks discreetly, "Your Highness, have you been coughing?" The other maid squints to the side with a displeased look. Irina appears in the doorway, flooded with light, the shadows of the maids in front of her. Her face is in close-up. She looks at them resolutely, thinking, "These people..." Irina sternly asks the maids what kind of noise they were making. The maids flinch and turn around, clearly not expecting her to show up. One of the maids, a blonde, smirks gloatingly as she looks at what's going on. The same maid points at the other, accusing her, "That girl touched His Highness's jewelry." The other maids immediately pick up on this, demanding that the accused Delphine be banished immediately. Irina, hearing this, is stunned, thinking, "What the..." She steps out to them, her voice sounding commanding. "What is this insolence?" Irina stares intently at one of the maids, turning to her. The older maid flinches as Irina demands an explanation from her. The older maid, Elda, sneers disdainfully, reminding Irina of her street origins. Elda states that Sarah saw Delphine touching His Highness's personal belongings, and that is why they have come to report. Irina chuckles faintly, her gaze full of understanding. "Ah, so that's it." The girl recalls, "That look is all too familiar to me. It's the way the servants looked at me when I first entered the Flora's house." A painful memory comes to mind. "The Duke's illegitimate daughter, by Annarisa's cook," whispered behind her back. The treatment of her, an unwanted bastard, was worse than that of a common maid. Had she been a commoner, perhaps her life would have been easier. Even the most recent servant girl could eventually achieve a position, save up money and go to a better job or start her own business. But Irina, because of her background, had never been given that opportunity. The name Flores became a curse for her, condemning her to 10 years of slavery on the estate, where she was treated worse than a servant. That's why, Irina thinks, looking at the maids, I can see right through them. She realizes it's a setup of sorts, where it's impossible to prove whether the missing item even existed. Irina turns to Elda, who smiles smugly and responds, "Yes?" The princess coldly inquires, "Isn't that your area of responsibility?" She accuses Elda of extreme, excessive rudeness, causing her to lose her temper. Irina lists the senior maid's blunders, failing to keep track of her master's belongings and failing to train her subordinates. On top of that, Elda made a commotion at the door while Irina was still asleep, and now tries to justify herself by mentioning Delphine. But Irina firmly interrupts her, stating that it is Elda who is being talked about now. The other two maids, including Sarah, lower their heads guiltily under the princess's stern gaze. Irina grins crookedly, pondering, "That's right, I don't have any support. What does a princess who married even a so-called monster prince have to fear?" She asks Elda who appointed her to the position. The latter confusedly replies that it was Countess Elvira. Irina points at Elda, stating that her arrogance defames Countess Elvira's honor. Elda is stunned. A drop of sweat runs down her face. She babbles, "Pardon me?" In Irina's mind on an ominous red background, "If they're not afraid of me..." Irina coldly states to the maids that she will report everything directly to the Countess. The two maids are terrified as Irina decides to instill even more fear in them for showing disrespect. Elda grabs hold of Irina's dress in a panic, admitting her guilt and stupidity. Irina turns away, thoughtfully repeating Elda's words. Guilt, indiscretion, mistake. A somber memory comes to mind. They say a bride on a rainy day is doomed to tears. Irina thinks back to the morning of her wedding, realizing that's when it all started. She decides, even if it's petty revenge, I must establish order to survive. The maids, including Elda, scream in horror, begging for forgiveness. "Your Highness!" Irina looks coldly at the blonde Sarah, asking her a question. The princess points to Sarah's apron pocket. "What's in your pocket?" Sarah panics as she tries to cover her pocket, babbling, "In nothing!" Irina imperiously orders another maid, Check that girl's pocket. The guard grabs Sarah, who screams, trying to blame it on Delphine. Irina turns away, not wanting to see this shame anymore, and orders Sarah to be led away. Irina's gaze is stern as Elda stares at the brooch in horror, and Delphine stands slack-jawed. Irina recalls Sarah's words accusing Delphine of stealing the jewelry. A moment flashes back to Sarah putting up or pointing at something while accusing Delphine. Delphine tearfully looks up, hearing her name being called out in the accusation. Delphine suddenly remembers. It dawns on her. On second thought, a disturbing thought crosses her mind. Didn't I dream something like that last night? The girl hesitates, a drop of sweat dripping down her face. Or is it just my imagination? She looks at the maids, remembering. And in last night's dream, too. Sarah flinches at the sight of her. Delphine's memory flashes back to Sarah's furious face when she was caught lying. Irina, watching all of this, ponders gloomily. Am I going crazy, or... The princess decisively points to one of the maids. You go out and fetch the knight immediately. Irina imperiously repeats the order, pointing her finger and telling the others not to move from their seats. The knight in armor soon appears, addressing Irina courteously. You called for me, Your Highness? Irina's gaze is full of icy determination. She is ready to deliver her verdict. Irina turns to the trembling maid, who babbles fearfully. Yes? The knight is puzzled. A drop of sweat drips down his face. He doesn't realize what's happening. A gloved hand shows off a gorgeous necklace, shocking one of the maids. The princess reminds, You all claimed Delphine touched the jewelry. Irina angrily questions Elda, pointing to the evidence. Then why was this found in Sarah's pocket? With icy calmness, she states, Theft is a serious crime that requires severe punishment. The knight leads away the guilty maids, who desperately beg for mercy. Delphine, with tears of gratitude in her eyes, sincerely thanks Irina for her rescue. The princess wistfully pronounces that if it weren't for her intervention, Delphine would have been unjustly condemned, and lets her go. Irina is left alone in her chambers, sitting pensively on the edge of her bed. Irina realizes she doesn't understand everything, but her top priority is clear. She needs allies. In her mind, there is a need for people she can truly trust in the palace. Suddenly, Caesar's voice is heard sitting up in bed. Ren? The prince sleepily wipes his eyes, his disheveled appearance giving him vulnerability. Irina turns to him with a smile, wondering if he's awake. Caesar blushes embarrassedly, sweetly propping his cheek with his hand and looking at her. The princess clenches her fist, struck by his unexpected softness and charm. The image of Caesar and his muzzle flashes through her mind, and she thinks of how many times he has endured injustice. Against the ominous backdrop comes a thought. Perhaps the hardships could only make him rebel. Irina gently touches Caesar's cheek, resolutely promising, I will change this for you. Caesar says thoughtfully, propping his cheek up. We are already bound by the same fate. Irina looks at him questioningly. Irina resolutely states to herself, For Caesar's sake and my own, I need someone I can trust. Her next thought emerges in the blurry background, and to do that, the princess realizes that she needs to speak to the empress, whose silhouette appears in her imagination. Suddenly, a voice is heard at the door. Your Highness, this is Mercedes, surprising Irina and Caesar on the bed. The elderly Lady Mercedes explains that she was looking for Caesar, as he was not in his chambers. Mercedes covers her mouth with her hand, exclaiming in surprise, Oh my God! She notices their closeness when Caesar leans gently on Irina's shoulder, saying, You two seem to be quite close. Irina blushes and looks away, embarrassed, whispering, Caesar? That's enough, as he snuggles up to her. Mercedes announces seriously, Just in time, I have something to tell you both. Mercedes announces that Irina has been invited to tea with the Empress while Caesar snuggles gently against her. The elderly lady confirms with a serious look that she has news for both of them. Irina, embarrassed by Caesar's proximity, listens to the invitation to afternoon tea with Her Majesty. The princess declares emphatically that she herself wanted to ask the Empress something. Mercedes looks surprised, and Irina wonders if she has the right to hire new servants. The lady praises Irina for the way she handled the morning's commotion, while condemning the insolence of the maids. Irina, still shaken, asks if servants in Caesar are always treated like that here. Mercedes explains that all the servants obey Countess Elvira, acting as if with the Empress's approval. The princess is outraged, not understanding how people can be treated like this, even with patronage. Irina grows gloomy as she ponders what she has heard. her resolve growing stronger. Irina makes a request of Mercedes while Caesar sits next to her on the bed. The princess explains her vulnerable position. She has no one in the palace to rely on. She asks Mercedes to help her until she can find her own maid. The lady looks puzzled. Mercedes, moved to tears, readily agrees to help Her Highness. The lady considers it an honor to serve her, and Irina sincerely thanks Mercedes, holding her hands. A new maid appears at the door, reminding Irina to change for tea. Irina wonders if Caesar will go with her, but Mercedes informs her that the Empress does not wish to see him. Caesar abruptly cuts Cornelia off, his eyes flashing angrily against the ominous red background. Cornelia's maid freezes in horror as she sees the prince's reaction to the words about his mother. Irina stares at Caesar in amazement, not understanding the reason for his sudden intervention. Caesar, with burning red eyes, abruptly utters, "No." Irina looks at him in horror, anticipating something wrong. Irina recalls the previous night and fears, is the effect of her blood on Caesar weakening? The prince draws Irina to him, whispering, "Let's talk in private, just for a little while." A drop of sweat drips down the princess's neck as she silently assesses the situation. Irina thinks there's no way she can get used to those intimidating eyes of Caesar's. The prince's gaze becomes even more savage, his red eyes glowing ominously in the semi-darkness. A close-up of Caesar's bloodshot eyes reflects his uncontrollable thirst. Caesar nuzzles into Irina's neck, and she excitedly asks him to leave no trace before meeting the Empress. The prince playfully touches her neck with his tongue, and Irina blushes, begging him to stop. Irina's hand tries to pull him away, but Caesar's grip only seems to grow stronger. Caesar's gaze turns wild, his eyes blazing red against an ominous background. Irina watches in horror as the prince laps at her arm, leaving a bloody trail. Caesar licks the blood from her hand, his red eyes staring at her unflinchingly. A close-up of his fangs touching her skin, quenching her uncontrollable thirst. Blood trickles down her fingers, dropping drop by drop. Irina moans suppressedly as Caesar nestles against her neck, continuing to drink. The princess is covered in sweat, tormented by the thought, "Am I doing the right thing?" She hopes she's not hurting Caesar as they remain in an embrace on the bed. Later, Irina instructs the maid, everything should be as simple as possible. While her hair is being brushed, she ponders. They're already hostile, it's best not to stand out. The problem is, Irina asks the maid to prepare gloves, deciding to put them on herself. As she puts on the glove, she thinks that the wound on her hand might be used against her. The maid quietly agrees as the princess finishes dressing. Fully prepared, Irina smilingly promises Caesar to return soon. Caesar abruptly jumps up on the bed, shouting no as she is about to leave. Irina turns around, regretfully saying there's nothing she can do. With red eyes and fangs showing through, Caesar stubbornly repeats, "No." Mercedes intervenes, rebuking the prince for disturbing Her Highness. The elderly lady promises to stay with Caesar and asks him to let the princess go. Irina, turning around in the doorway, confirms that she will be back soon and waves her hand. Caesar, with a crazed look and red eyes, stubbornly says, "No." A mocking cry is heard in the greenhouse. "Her Highness the Princess Consort is eating." Irina stumbles in a hurry, nearly falling over on her way to the Empress. A tear rolls down her cheek as she tries to hide her pain and humiliation. The princess, fists clenched, stands in the middle of the hall, surrounded by indifferent maids. She bitterly realizes, they deliberately didn't tell me the exact location. It turned out that the tea party was scheduled in the farthest greenhouse, which would take her a long time to reach. With a limp, Irina walks determinedly toward the guards at the entrance to the greenhouse. One of the guards chuckles faintly as he watches her agony. Irina wrinkles her nose in pain, realizing that her leg injury has been used against her. A guard at the entrance to the greenhouse loudly reminds Irina to show respect to the Empress. Close up, a smug smile plays across the Empress's face. Empress Rosalind sits majestically at the table, waiting for Irina. Irina and the Empress gazes meet, one full of pain, the other of cold authority. Overcoming the pain, Irina drops to her knees, saluting Her Majesty. The Empress looks down on Irina, her gaze full of contempt. Irina remains kneeling before the Empress, surrounded by idle maids. The princess wrinkles her nose at the piercing pain in her injured leg. The Empress coldly utters the return part of her greeting, stretching out the words. Irina continues to kneel as the Empress watches her humiliation. Irina, unable to bear the pain, begins to fall, losing her balance. The maid barely manages to pick up the princess, addressing her, "Your Highness, the princess's consort." The Empress, hearing the noise, slowly turns her head, her scarlet hair fluttering. Irina struggles to thank the maid, trying to hide a grimace of pain. The girl who helped her guiltily lowers her eyes under the heavy gaze. The senior maid of honor coldly points Irina to a seat, ordering the others to step back. The princess is seated at a table across from the Empress in the luxurious greenhouse. Empress Rosalind gives Irina an icy stare, an exotic parrot perched on her shoulder. With a slight chuckle, Her Majesty inquires, "So, how is life in the palace? Is it comfortable?" Irina sits tensely, feeling trapped in front of her powerful mother-in-law. Irina, holding back tears, begins to speak. Well, the princess continues, "I have something to say to your majesty." She decisively states, "It concerns the first prince." The Empress coldly replies, "Go on." Irina reports that certain people, possibly knights or servants, are harming Caesar. She confirms that the prince's body is covered in wounds while a butterfly lands on a rose. The princess adds that he was even kept in chains and a muzzle. The Empress replies briefly, "I see." The maid brings the fire to the Empress's long mouthpiece. The Empress looks away thoughtfully. Irina suddenly coughs, covering her mouth with a gloved hand. The Empress, exhaling smoke, asks bluntly, "So, and what do you want me to do?" Irina interjects, shocked, Pardon me?" The Empress, tapping on her mouthpiece, coldly interjects, "Didn't you hear me?" Irina, caught off guard, babbles excitedly, But..." The princess struggles to find the words in confusion, her voice trembling. "But..." The Empress states with icy calmness, "People should only be treated as humans if they are." Rosalind pierces Irina with a glare, questioning, "And what do you think makes someone human?" The princess remains stunned silent. The parrot on the Empress's shoulder suddenly cries out loudly, "Human!" Her Majesty grins, stroking the bird. "Exactly. One must act like a human to be called one." The Empress challenges Irina, "Have you ever seen the first prince act like a human?" Rosalind points to a parrot pacing the table. "A man has to walk on 2 legs." The bird uses its beak to untie the pouch while the Empress adds, "To use implements of labor." The Empress continues, "And speak the language of men," and the parrot immediately calls out, "Hello." Irina listens in horror as the bird wishes her a beautiful day and praises her lovely hat. Rosalind coldly inquires, "Do you see the difference between the first prince and this bird?" Suddenly, the Empress grabs the parrot. It screams desperately. Irina flinches in surprise, covering her face as Rosalind orders, "Look." The Empress declares that this bird is in some ways even better than the prince, for she can control it. She releases the parrot, and a light feather falls from her palm. The bird soars upward, flying around the luxurious greenhouse. The parrot lands on the back of a chair, and the Empress asks, "What about the first prince?" Rosalind states disdainfully, "He is an unruly beast." The Empress states with icy calmness that such a beast naturally needs a whip. Rosalind sneeringly asks how else such a creature could be handled. Irina lowers her head in despair, whispering, "But Caesar..." A gruesome scene erupts. The prince is being beaten, and the Empress explains that it is natural to beat a disobedient beast. The princess jumps up sharply, clenching her fists. "His Highness is not a beast!" The Empress raises an eyebrow in surprise, and Irina is horrified to realize her blunder.